In the brutal, high-stakes chess match of the Second World War, the most valuable piece on the board was information. Knowing where your enemy was, where he was massing his forces, and where he would strike next was the key to victory. By 1943, the Allies were beginning to gain a decisive advantage in this secret war. Their codebreakers at Bletchley Park had cracked the German Enigma code, giving them an unprecedented, almost godlike view into the enemy's plans. But the Germans were not fools. They had their own formidable intelligence-gathering apparatus, and their most effective tool was the long-range reconnaissance aircraft. From airfields in France and Norway, sleek, high-altitude German planes like the Junkers Ju-88 and the Fokker Wolf 4200 Condor would fly daring missions over Great Britain. They were the eyes of the Third Reich. Their cameras would sweep across the English countryside, photographing the airfields, the ports, and the vast assembly areas where the Allies were gathering the men and machines for the eventual invasion of Europe. Every photograph they took was a piece of a puzzle, a clue that could reveal the Allies' most precious secret, the time and place of D-Day. The Allies were facing a deadly problem. They were building the largest invasion force in history in southern England, a concentration of military power so immense it seemed impossible to hide. Every new airfield carved out of a farmer's field, every new squadron of B-17 bombers parked wingtip to wingtip, every vast motor pool filled with thousands of tanks and trucks. All of this was a massive, flashing arrow pointing directly at their intentions. They could shoot down some of the German reconnaissance planes, but some would always get through, and as long as they could get through, the Germans would be able to watch the Allied build up, count their forces, and accurately predict their strategy. The conventional military solution to this problem was camouflage. The US Army Corps of Engineers had become masters of hiding things. They could cover an ammunition dump with netting, paint a factory to blend in with the surrounding landscape, and dig in artillery batteries so they were all but invisible. But the problem in England was one of scale. You can hide a single gun, you can even hide a factory, but how do you hide an entire air force? How do you make 100 B-17 bombers with their massive 100-foot wingspans simply disappear from a photograph? The answer, a group of unconventional thinkers in the Allied High Command realized, was that you don't. They understood that they could not win the game of hiding. The German cameras were too good, and the Allied build-up was too big. So they decided to change the game. If you can't hide what you have, then the only other option is to lie, to deceive. To create a phantom, a ghost, a mirror image of reality so convincing that the enemy would be unable to tell the difference between the real and the fake. It was a strategy born of desperation and breathtaking audacity. It was a decision to fight a war not with bullets and bombs, but with illusions and magic tricks. But to pull off a magic trick of this magnitude, they needed magicians. They needed men who were not trained in the rigid science of military engineering, but in the fluid, deceptive art of illusion. They needed men whose entire professional lives were dedicated to fooling the human eye and the camera lens. Just as they had done for the jungle warfare problem in the Pacific, the call went out once again to the one place in the world that manufactured illusions on an industrial scale, Hollywood. A new, top-secret project was born, a joint British-American venture that brought together some of the most creative minds of the era. The British, with their long history of espionage and cunning, called their section the Camouflage Development and Training Center. Its leader was a man who seemed to be straight out of a spy novel, Lieutenant Colonel John Solomon Jasper, a professional magician who had spent his life performing on the stages of London, a master of sleight of hand and misdirection. The American contribution was equally eccentric and brilliant. They recruited set designers from MGM and Warner Brothers, special effects wizards from RKO, and even model makers and artists from the Walt Disney Studios. These were the men who had created the Emerald City for the Wizard of Oz, who had built the vast miniature ships for historical epics, and who had perfected the art of making fantasy look like reality. Now, their country was asking them to do the opposite, to make reality look like fantasy, to build an entire phantom air force designed to be seen, to be photographed, and to be tragically misinterpreted by the German High Command. Their secret workshop was not a military base, but a series of film studios and requisitioned country estates that were hidden from prying eyes. Here, this motley crew of artists and magicians began their strange and wonderful work. They were given a seemingly impossible task: create a fleet of fake full-scale heavy bombers, fighters, and all the associated equipment, so convincing that they would fool the sharp-eyed German reconnaissance pilots and their high-resolution cameras from 30,000 feet. They approached the problem not as soldiers, but as filmmakers. What does an airfield look like from the sky? It is not just the airplanes, it is the entire ecosystem of activity. It is the oil stains on the pavement, the tire tracks in the mud, the scattered fuel drums, the maintenance tents, the laundry lines hanging between the barracks. The secret, they knew, was in the details. They began to build their props. But building hundreds of full-scale B-17s out of wood and metal would be too slow and expensive. They needed something cheap, light, and fast. The solution came from the British magician Jasper and his experience with stage props. They would build their ghost army out of rubber. They worked with the Dunlop Rubber Company to design and manufacture a fleet of full-scale inflatable B-17 bombers, P-51 fighters, and Sherman tanks. These were, in effect, giant, incredibly detailed military-grade bouncy castles. A small team of men with a single air compressor could build an entire squadron of heavy bombers in a matter of hours. When a German reconnaissance plane was detected approaching the area, the teams would frantically inflate their Phantom Air Force. After the plane had passed, they would deflate them, pack them into a few wooden crates, and move them to a new location overnight, creating the illusion of a highly mobile and active air group. But the planes themselves were only the beginning. The Hollywood magicians knew that a static, perfect-looking airfield would be a dead giveaway. An airfield needed to look used, to look alive. So, they created a whole host of special effects to bring their phantom bases to life. They used tractors with special attachments to create fake tire tracks around the inflatable planes. They poured used motor oil on the ground to simulate the leaks and spills of a real airbase. They even created fake, bomb-cratered runways to give the impression that the base had been recently attacked and was undergoing repairs. They were not just building props, they were telling a story. It was the most elaborate and high-stakes piece of theatre ever produced. The stage was the entire southeast of England. The audience was a single, critical group of German intelligence analysts in Berlin, and the performance was about to begin. The Hollywood magicians had created their army of ghosts, a phantom force designed to lure the Luftwaffe into a fatal miscalculation and to protect the real D-Day invasion force. The Great Deception was underway. The grand deception that would become known as Operation Fortitude was a multi-layered masterpiece of misdirection, and the Phantom Air Force created by the Hollywood magicians was its glittering centerpiece. The primary goal was to convince the German High Command of a massive, undeniable falsehood, that the main Allied invasion of Europe would come not at Normandy, but at the Pas-de-Calais, the closest point between England and France. To sell this lie, the Allies needed to create an entirely fictional army group, the first US Army Group, or Fuselage, and position it in southeastern England, directly opposite Calais. And an army group of that size needed its own colossal air force. This was the stage upon which the camoufleurs and their army of ghosts would give the performance of a lifetime. Beginning in early 1944, a series of brand new and completely fake airfields began to appear as if by magic across the countryside of Kent and Essex. To a German reconnaissance pilot flying high overhead, they looked perfect. The runways were flawlessly constructed, often just strips of rolled earth painted to look like concrete. The barracks and maintenance hangars looked solid. They were mostly canvas and wood frames. And, most importantly, the hard stands were filled with row upon row of American heavy bombers and fighters. The German pilots would risk their lives to fly these missions, braving Allied fighter patrols and anti-aircraft fire. They would return to their bases in France, their precious reconnaissance film being rushed to intelligence analysts in Berlin. In darkened rooms, German photo interpreters would project the images, their eyes tracing the familiar, threatening shapes of B-17s and P-51s. They would count the planes, identify the unit markings, which were also fake, designed by the Disney artists, and file their reports. The reports all confirmed the same thing. A massive American strategic air force was massing in southeastern England, clearly preparing to support an invasion at Calais. The Hollywood magicians knew that static props were not enough. They had to create the illusion of activity. This is where their true genius for theatricality came into play. They deployed small, dedicated teams of actors, real GIs, who were part of the secret unit to bring the ghost airfields to life. These teams would drive real trucks and jeeps around the inflatable planes, following carefully scripted patterns to create the impression of busy ground crews. They would hang laundry on clotheslines between the fake barracks. They would even light smoke pots in the mess hall chimneys during mealtimes. A single, well-placed bulldozer would be used to create the convincing illusion of new construction. They were, in effect, set-dressing an entire region of a country. The deception was not just visual. The Allies initiated a massive radio deception campaign, codenamed Operation Quicksilver. A small team of expert radio operators, broadcasting from a few trucks hidden in the woods, would mimic the entire radio traffic of a busy Air Force command. They would broadcast fake weather reports, chatter between pilots and control towers, and even scripted arguments between officers, all designed to be intercepted by the Germans. The Germans, listening in, heard the unmistakable electronic pulse of a massive air army preparing for battle. Perhaps the most famous part of this grand illusion was the use of a real person as the ultimate prop, General George S. Patton, Jr. The Germans considered Patton to be the Allies' best, most aggressive, and most brilliant field commander. The deception planners used this reputation to their advantage. They publicly and very visibly placed Patton in command of the fictional Fusage. He was sent on a series of high-profile tours around southeastern England, visiting the ghost airfields and phantom army camps, knowing he was being watched by German agents. The Germans' logic was simple and fatally flawed. Wherever Patton was, that is where the main attack would be. The cumulative effect of this multi-layered deception was overwhelming. The inflatable planes, the fake radio traffic, and the presence of Patton all combined to create an illusion so convincing that the German high command swallowed it whole. They became utterly convinced that Calais was the target. As a result, they kept the bulk of their best and most powerful divisions, the elite 15th Army, including numerous Panzer divisions, anchored in the Pas-de-Calais region, waiting for an invasion that would never come. On June 6, 1944, when the real invasion fleet appeared off the coast of Normandy, the initial reaction at Hitler's headquarters was not panic, but a sense of smug satisfaction. This Normandy landing, they believed, was a feint, a diversion designed to draw their forces away from the real invasion site at Calais. They refused to release the powerful Panzer divisions from the Calais area to counterattack the Normandy beachhead. They were waiting for Patton's main event. Even for weeks after D-Day, as the fighting in Normandy raged and the Allies slowly expanded their foothold, the Germans kept their best divisions in reserve, their eyes still glued to the east. The Ghost Army continued its performance, moving its inflatable planes from one fake airfield to another, creating the illusion that Fusage was still preparing to strike. The impact of this deception cannot be overstated. Military historians almost universally agree that if the powerful German divisions held in reserve at Calais had been unleashed on the fragile Normandy beachhead in the first 24-48 hours, the D-Day invasion could very well have failed. The Ghost Army, the phantom air force created by the Hollywood magicians, had not fired a single shot, but it had arguably saved thousands, if not tens of thousands, of Allied lives. The story is a testament to the power of creativity in warfare. The US Air Force had a deadly problem, an enemy who could see their every move. They solved it not with a bigger gun or a faster plane, but with a grand theatrical lie. They hired a team of magicians and artists, men who understood that the human mind, even the disciplined mind of a German general, could be fooled. They proved that the most powerful weapon in the world is not always a bomb. Sometimes it is a convincing illusion. The army of ghosts, born in the dream factories of Hollywood, had played its part to perfection, and in doing so, had helped to ensure the liberation of a continent.